Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 258.
And this week, it's Daisy's turn. Daisy, what do you have for us?
Well, Terry, I was going to be coming to you today with a Huberman podcast episode. However, I'm only about 25% of the way in, and I wasn't sure what time we were recording today, and I figured I probably wouldn't be able to get to the end because it's a 2 hours plus episode. And, you can't rush a Huberman. So I decided instead to go and have a look at Kwik Brain because those are always reliable for a quick and interesting episode. So I will be back to you week after next with the Huberman episode, which I think you're going to enjoy.
Awesome.
So the one I have for you today is called High Functioning Depression and 5 Steps to Overcome It with Dr. Judith Joseph. An interesting aside on this episode, it was actually hosted by a new co-host called Alexis Bank. Apparently, they have recorded together with I think it was his latest audiobook, not the audiobook that we've got. Not sure about that. But apparently with the audiobook, actually, come to think of it, I have the actual book and I think you do. So I think that might be one of those rare occasions where we didn't listen to it rather than reading it. But apparently in the audiobook of one of his books, at the end of each chapter, he does like a sort of a podcast episode with this woman, with Alexis. So it sort of adds extra interest to the audiobook. And he's brought her on board to be involved with the podcast. So some of the podcasts she's going to be hosting as opposed to him. So I think this must have been the first one because he was introducing her and telling us about this. So she's the one who's asking the questions in this episode, not Jim. But we did hear from Jim briefly at the beginning. So Dr. Judith Joseph is a board-certified psychiatrist conducting the first of its kind research study in high-functioning depression. And she's also really interested she's interested in mental health, has her own podcast called The Vault. And I did have a very, very quick look at that. I think it's something that I'll be listening to some episodes from. They're sort of half an hour length episodes and looks like all sorts of interesting topics around mental health, depression, anxiety, those kind of things. So that looks interesting. Another potential new podcast to go and listen to. But she has developed what's called the TIES method. And interestingly, they put this in the introduction, but they didn't actually tell us about that. So I'll have to go and Google that, and presumably it's in the book. But the TIES method to address mental health challenges during menopause. And she's an advocate for menopause research. I'm very interested in that, and particularly mental health with menopause. And she actually mentions at the end of the episode, they always ask them something they're interested in. And she talks a little bit about this, some research that she's doing with that, and research and things that she's been interested with postpartum depression. She mentions, as a quick aside here, rather than mentioning at the end, apparently about 80% of women experience the baby blues after giving birth. And she was talking about, so often they're told to be happy. It's all about being happy about this time. And a lot of women are not feeling too great. So she's really interested in that and mental health issues during menopause. And as a general thing, apparently women are twice as likely than men to have depression and anxiety. So it sounds like she's a strong advocate for digging into these things, which is always good. So back to this particular episode, it's about high functioning depression. And so the obvious question, and the question they kick off with, is, well, how does this differ from other types of depression? What is high functioning depression? And a typical candidate for this would be a busy mum. She says, we're the rock, we're the parent, leader, entrepreneur, caregiver, but actually struggling and nobody knows because we wear this mask of productivity. So it's a hidden depression. And the traditional medical system talks about clinical depression having certain symptoms, impairment in functioning, significant distress. But she was saying that she was seeing a lot of people who were experiencing lots of symptoms, things like being exhausted, lack of focus, poor sleep, other symptoms of depression. Anhedonia, she was saying, was something that comes up a lot, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, and this was a term that I only learnt about recently, anhedonia means a lack of interest and pleasure in things that used to bring you joy. And this apparently is something very, very typical. And feeling guilty when they're not delivering and showing up, or feeling like they're not delivering and showing up for others. So lots of symptoms of depression, but still functioning. And many people not just functioning, but over functioning. So being really busy is a typical sign. So this new co-host, Alexis, asks, how is stress affecting these people versus with other forms of depression? Stress is something that comes up a lot in talking about depression and how it impacts people. She refers back to saying how she started off the podcast by saying, I didn't mention this, but she actually kicked it off by saying she loves to talk about happiness. It seems to be a funny thing to say when you're talking about depression, but there can't be light without darkness. There can't be happiness without sadness. So she wants people to understand the science of happiness. And as a quick aside there, I can remember not my mind being blown exactly, but really being fascinated by a Keats poem that talks about that. That was the first time, and obviously it was couched in very poetic language, but just talking about this concept, I can remember it really coming home to me, because it was one of my periods of depression at school. And first sort of, I suppose, learning about those feelings and putting a name to those feelings of depression. But hearing this poem, and he talks about, you can't have one without the other. With joy comes melancholy. And actually to a certain extent, to embrace that contrast, because you can't experience one without the other. So, they come along as a package, and you're missing out on joy if you're not also experiencing the other end of the scale. But just a little aside there. But she says it's very individual. It really varies, this science of happiness. And depression as well is expressed very differently in different people. Some people may become very busy rather than acknowledging their symptoms of depression. Typically, they might feel very restless when they sit still. They feel empty when they have nothing to do. So they have to work. And she found in her research that many, if not all of these people, have unprocessed trauma. And being busy is a great distraction. You can avoid emotions, memories that you don't want to think about by being busy all the time. And so overproductiveness is a way people express their pain who have high functioning depression. Lots of guilt and feeling like you can never win. So back to the science of happiness. She says you really need to understand your own science. And she said, you need to know that we're all born with the DNA, the genetics to create joy, but some of us have forgotten how to access it. So Alexis asks her, are there any universal habits people have for happiness? And this is where she goes into her, what she calls the 5 V's. And these are things, I suppose, that can help you start tapping into this. Didn't really ever sort of classify exactly what she means by the science of happiness. I'm sure she goes into it much more in the book. But she does give us these 5 V's. And these, I guess, are what they refer to in the title, the 5 steps to at least help overcome this high functioning depression. And I think you're going to like these. A lot of these are things that you've talked about in the past. So the first one is validation. When you accept how you feel, no matter how good or bad it is, and name the emotions, there's less self-blame. So you need to say, I'm feeling something that's real, whatever it is. Validate that emotion. Then you go on to vent. It's the next V, the emotions. She said, because she's a high-functioning depressive, by the way, as an aside, and she said that she never used to be a crier, but she has started to be a little bit more of a crier. She says she finds this a way of venting. And she says that when you cry, you release hormones and stress. She says, when you think about it, tears don't actually have a function, aside from lubricating your eyeballs. There's no real function for tears, but that is the function, is that they can help you feel better. That was an interesting one. Aside, I always think when people are saying these things, I think about what I think about these things, and I often actually avoid crying. I'm one of these people who, I suppose sometimes if there's just that brief vent, it's okay, but I avoid films I know that are going to make me cry, for example, because I can just end up in a really low state if I cry too much. So, I suppose like with all these things, she says it's very individual, not going to work the same for everybody. But for her, she's found that crying is quite good. But she says it can also be to talk to somebody. Writing it down can help. This can be your way that you vent. Singing your feelings. She said a lot of people she's worked with, that really helps. All sorts of ways, drawing, whatever it is. She says that there's no right or wrong way, but there are ways to do it that are better than others. So, for example, telling somebody about your feelings, good way, versus trauma dumping on them, not so good. Talking to a peer versus unloading on one of your kids. So just be a little bit mindful about how you're venting. Be a bit mindful about the potential impact on other people. Then we go on to values. And this was, you're going to be pleased to hear, she did get to the end of the 5 V's and in a good time too. Values. What are the things that bring meaning in your life? What things, she says, and I like this, what things are priceless versus having a price tag? These obviously tend to be things that you really believe in, things that give your life purpose and meaning. Are you potentially spending a lot of your time incongruous to these? We've talked about this before, haven't we? Especially with something that you spend a lot of time doing, like your work, for example. She cited, you might know that you're somebody who thrives more in a group and you spend all your time working on your own. Well, maybe that's something you need to think about. Vitals is V number 4. And this is where you need to look after you. Take care of your body through diet, movement, connection with other people, sleep, etc. That's taking care of the physical you. And the last one is vision. How do you keep yourself moving forward rather than being stuck in the past? And this is, when I'm listening to these people, I've often got, this is something that Terry says. Do you stop and celebrate the wins often enough? Or are you always moving straight on to the next big thing? So this is obviously something that's very relevant to these people who have high functioning depression, who are all about work. They're always pushing, distracting, working to the next thing. Very common thing is going to be that they're not stopping and celebrating the wins, be those small wins, be those big wins. And this is something she makes quite a big thing of, but they don't go on to discuss much. But I suspect it's a big thing in her book. How do you celebrate wins in the today? And something that she calls points of joy. And it's about pausing, celebrating, recognizing these small points of joy in your day to day. And so, of course, this is a quick episode. So they're really just giving you a taster. And I felt like it was a good one on that score. They sort of gave enough that really sort of teased out. There's a lot more depth to her book, which actually I forgot to tell you the name of her book. The name of her book is High Functioning Depression, Overcome Your Hidden Depression and Reclaim Your Joy. And so I think that might be a book that's of value to a number of people out there. But there are a lot of things there that you've spoken about. I like the way she ended on that, celebrating the wins in the day-to-day and these points of joy that I'd like to find out more depth about what she means by that. But I think that's a really important thing especially if you're one of these people that's just push, work. It's important to pause.
Well, Daisy, as you were talking, I already downloaded the book because I'm very interested. And one of the things I like about what you described about it is, I think oftentimes when we think about depression, we think about the overwhelming depression that kind of debilitates people. And for some of us, that's even hard to imagine because we maybe haven't experienced it like that. And then, unfortunately, I think we downplay what actually is an experience of depression.
Yeah. Unless you're like Eeyore.
That's right.
You're not really experiencing depression. And then you start getting into sort of questioning yourself. Oh, am I depressed? I'm not depressed. If I'm not looking depressed, if I don't look like Eeyore, then am I really depressed?
And you probably know this about me. I don't love diagnosing. I don't love having to have a label. But having a label also helps us know then what to do. And if we can't acknowledge that there's a degree of depression, we don't know to take any steps to change anything. And so I think looking at something like this high functioning, that even though you're still going to work or you're still engaging socially or whatnot, you may still be experiencing depression. And using these 5 V's, you can do things to feel better or alleviate some of that depression. So I downloaded it as soon as you started talking. I'm like, okay, let me find it. And just as an aside, anyone who uses Audible, it is currently on sale. So even if you didn't have a credit left, it's only like $13 to buy the book right now. So I got very excited and I did download it because the other piece that you talked about was the anhedonia. I've always very much associated with anhedonia. I am someone, unfortunately, I think of myself as fairly optimistic, but when it comes to things, I don't experience it, I think, sometimes the way other people do. Other people see a movie and they're like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it's all right. But if you ask me later if it was a good movie, I'm going to tell you yes. But my degree of enjoyment at the time was meh. So I have, for years, very much associated with that sense of anhedonia. And the other part that you talked about is the physical symptoms of depression, like one of the V's being the vitals, that sometimes I have experienced some of the physical symptoms of depression, but affectively would not have said I felt depressed. Sleeping a lot more than usual, eating less or eating more, whatever, some of those physical symptoms, but would not have recognized that what I was experiencing might be described as depression. So I think she just seems to be doing a nice job of really kind of the whole wraparound around this high functioning depression, this feeling of anhedonia where you just don't get pleasure or joy from things. And sometimes that is a marker of, all of the physical symptoms are there. And it's not until someone recognizes, oh yeah, I'm not enjoying anything that I used to enjoy. Oh, perhaps this is depression. But I think it's really helpful that you highlighted both the physical and the affective or subjective experience of anhedonia or depression, and that there are steps. And for some people, taking steps while it's at this high functioning level can prevent from slipping into a level of depression that feels less functional.
Yeah, good point.
That you can't get out of bed or can't engage with other people. So I really like that you found this. I'm excited to get to listen to the book and start working on these 5 V's.
Yes, I really liked her, and I I just felt that where she describes it as this, it's a hidden depression. And, I'm not in this category that I'm imagining, but I'm imagining all these women, just as described at the beginning, quite often busy mums who just, they're everything. They're caregivers to children, maybe to parents. They're working in the home, they're working at a job, they're maybe managing a company, they're doing all the things. And being women, they are doing all the things and they are functioning, but potentially they're feeling like crap, but they're keeping going, they're keeping everything going. And I think there are probably so many women out there who we maybe famous women that we see on TV and everything, and they just have this image of having it all, doing it all. They can't possibly be depressed. And so it is this group that potentially are really suffering underneath, but just keeping going probably predominantly for everybody else. And you wonder maybe, and I do find it interesting that menopause is something that she's interested in as well, because I wonder how many kind of experience a little bit of a crash, particularly this kind of particular group that I'm thinking of, that when their kids are of an age where I'm sure, you never stop having to do a load of stuff for your kids, but there is a time, isn't there, when you haven't got to be doing all those things that take up so much time, and you have a bit more time for yourself, that you're not as busy, having to be busy all the time. And I wonder if that maybe is one of the periods of time when you crash from that, let alone all the hormones that are flying around and changing during menopause. So maybe that's another factor that feeds into the potential problem that is menopause and how deeply it affects women. Perhaps this is just another layer, so I really think, whether you fall into this category or not, thinking about these 5 V's and these points of joy, I think can help all of us. So yes, I have a feeling I might be downloading the book as well. I like her, and I had a brief look at her podcast, and that looks good as well. She seems to be talking to a nice range and diverse group of people. So I think that might be a podcast worth dipping into too.
I think also just the power of being able to acknowledge that hormonal changes as we go through life stages really, manifest in symptoms linked to depression, and understanding that and not pathologizing, but also not just saying, well, you're a woman of that age, so sorry, you have to experience that. I was kind of surprised as I started looking that she also has done work in the menopause field, which, not all psychiatrists do. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a good one for us, Daisy. I think Excellent. We may come back to her at some point.
We may come back to discuss her book if we're both going to listen to it.
That's right.
Very good. Well, I'm glad I stumbled upon a good one in my rush to do something quick, pun intended.
Very good.
Okay, well, until I see you next time, I hope you and everyone at home has a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everyone.